Hey everyone, Azrach here, and today we're taking a look at my fully 3D printed action figure. So this figure here is the Eradicator action figure from the Return of Superman line, and this figure I wanted to create because I had the Return of Superman line of action figures from Mafex, but Eradicator and Superboy are missing, so I thought that I had a base body and Eradicator would be the good next step of action figure that I can make using that body, and I think it turned out really nice. So this is a video of how I printed it and assembled it. To make this awesome looking figure, I used the Resi1 M58 and Resi1 TH72 resins. These resins were provided to me by the amazing folks over at Resi1, so I could try these resins out and then make this action figure. Thank you so much, Resione, for providing me with these resins, and I am really happy that I got to use them. And this is, I think, the best combination of resins in terms of strength and durability that I've used to create my action figure so far. So to kick things off, here we have a 3D render of the action figure. This action figure was completely sculpted and articulated in Blender. So Blender is a free tool that anyone can pick up. There are plenty of tutorials on the internet for someone to take the software and make amazing art. I have watched thousands of videos and also spent thousands of hours just tweaking things, trying things out. So yeah, it took me a little bit of time to get here, but I think this software is very capable and allows you to do quite a lot, which is amazing. Once I sculpted the figure and articulated it, all I do then is take all of these individual parts and export them as STL files. And these are basically just files that are interactable by the slicing software, so that you can 3D print these files. I also want to give a huge shout out and thanks to my friend Orbis22. He created these amazing looking eradicator heads. He's basically a digital sculptor who does a much better job in terms of sculpting heads than I do. I'm still catching up and learning, but he does amazing heads, and he provided us with these 3 additional heads for this eradicator figure, and I think it just makes the figure look that much better. Once I have all of these individual parts exported as STL files. So STL files are basically these files that the 3D printer can read, or the slicing software can read, so that it's ready for 3D printing. This is what the files will look like. For slicing, I'm very fond of Lychee Slicer, which in my opinion is the best slicing software that I've used. So on this application, all I need to do is drag and drop my 3D printable files, and they're pretty simple to do. Once you drag and drop them onto the slicer, you can repair the 3D models. Although I have made sure that there are no holes on the actual files. It's just something that that this software does for you, and it's just better to get the software to run through that once, and that just means that there's less issues. Once you put the files onto the slicer, all you need to do is then support the files. I typically tilt the files back slightly, so that all the supports can go at the back, and all the front facing parts that are more detailed or that are more visible do not have any support artifacts once you're done with the printing. So to add supports, I do not do much, and I do this for all my prints. All I do is generate automatic medium supports. So these supports will give you enough for the figure to stay on the base plate and not cause any problems. There are some supports that I don't want to be as bulky, so I do change them to small, and I also inspect the file once over to make sure that all the parts here are covered with additional small supports. So this just makes sure that the print does not fail. I would rather have more supports that I need to clean up than a failed print, so I just make sure that I go through everything here, and all of these yellow checkered bits here, it just means that if you add a few additional supports here, it will just make sure that the print's that much better in terms of printing. So here I've added a few more parts so we can do this demo. I've just added the chest and the back. So at this stage, I'm ready to export the files for my printer, and that I do on this export tab here. I am currently using the Uniformation GK2, but that's a new printer that I got. The figure that you see on this video is actually printed on the Elgo Mars 2 Pro, which was the previous printer I had. It was a smaller printer, so I had to do multiple batches of printing. So I thought that upgrading to a GK2 would be a good choice, because I can do more in terms of printing more parts at once. So I'm looking forward to using this printer. But On the export settings, I do not change too much. On the anti-aliasing tab here, all I do is click on the sharpen details. So before we get to that, all of the resin settings I downloaded from Resione's website. Resione has different settings for all of the different available printers. They have, I think, settings for most of the I guess more popular printers. I did have one for the Elegoo Mars 2 Pro as well, which I got off of their website. So I just get these default files and tweak them slightly so that they make sense to what I'm doing in terms of printing. And there might be some adjustments that you need to make based on your printing temperature and the season in your location. So think about that before you do printing. There are some calibration tests that you can do, but I think you can look at them more online, as this is not really a video for that. But in terms of my settings, all I do is click on sharpen details in the anti-aliasing section and set the level to 4. Anything higher, I've seen that there are some parts that don't print as well, because with the higher settings, I've seen some of the edges missing or misprinting slightly. So when I have it at a lower level of 4, it just prints more consistently. And I want also to turn on the high definition anti-aliasing, which means that the system puts in a little bit more work in terms of defining that area when it's exporting, and the anti-aliasing works a little bit better from what I've seen. So once I do that, we're ready to export. Click on the export button here. It will give you a 20-second timer, because if you're using the free version of Lychee Slicer, it will go through that process. But once that happens, you can export the files onto your folder and hit save. It will then start generating that layer by layer kind of interpretation of your files, and this is what that looks like. So this is typically what your printer will be doing for each layer, is exposing these light lighted parts for each layer of your figure, and then that becomes your entire 3D print. So yeah, once that is done, I can take these files, or take this file that I've saved over to my printer, and we're ready to print. So at the printer, I'm using the Resione M58 and Resione TH72 resins in a mix. So the ratio for this mix is 3:2, or 60% of M58 and 40% of TH72. The way I get this consistent is I have a measuring jug that allows me to measure up to 1,000 milliliters. So I pour in 600 milliliters of M58 and 400 milliliters of TH72, and then just give it a thorough shake. Thorough mix, and I will then put it into one of my containers. I just have a few extra 1 liter containers, or 1,000 ml containers that will fill that container completely, and that's the resin I've been using for this particular figure. I've done, I think, 2 complete figures and a whole bunch of other spare parts, and I still have more than half of the resin left. So that 1 liter of resin goes a long way. For the reason I use the M58 and the TH72 is because the M58 is a mechanical resin, so it has properties where the resin, if you grind it with other resin, it will not create powdering, so you'll not have any issues with the resin slowly degrading, or you inhaling fine resin dust, which is probably not good for you. And also the TH72 is a very strong and durable resin that lends its durability and difficulty to break really, really well for my action figures. So I think currently, with all the resins that I've tested, this is the best combination that I've found. But I'm always looking at new, more exciting ways and stronger combinations of resins. Resione has also provided me with the anti-impact resin, so I'll be testing that out shortly. But that's another resin that I have heard a lot of good things about, and I'm just yet to test it still. So for this particular figure, because I'm using a lot of small parts to give the figure mobility, I have a lot of these joints which are fairly small, and easy to, I guess, break if you're not doing it correctly. Make sure that you print a few extra wrists and ankle joints, as well as some knee and elbow pegs. That'll come. I'll show you why later. But there might be some imperfections on the prints that might basically catch the resin onto another part, and then it might break. So having that extra really sometimes helps out. So after the prints are done, all I have to do is remove the prints from the print bed, and we clean the prints in IPA alcohol solution. So the IPA alcohol that I'm using is in a Tupperware container, and I've just filled it with half filled with IPA solution. I dropped the figures or the printed parts with supports and all into the vat of IPA, and then I mix it around for a little bit, and I leave it to basically soak for about 2 minutes, and then I can then remove it from the Tupperware container and remove the supports. To remove the supports, I heat up the print slightly so that the supports are soft, and the artifact that is left after I remove the support is reduced slightly. Once I've done that, I leave the parts out to dry for about 4 to 6 hours, and then we're ready to cure the prints. For this particular resin combo, I'm using the Elegoo Mercury curing station. I typically leave the parts in there for about 15 minutes to cure. The M58 on its own cures in about 3 minutes, but because we've got the TH72 added, it does take slightly longer to cure, so about 15 minutes should do the job. Again, you might have a different curing box which might have different strengths, so you might want to test that out a little bit. But once it is cured, you are now ready to bring it into your workstation to sand and clean up, and you can do this to your heart's content to achieve the result you desire. Now once it's clean, we can move on to paint the figure, but I do advise that you leave these parts out to dry, or just to post curing leave these parts out for about 24 hours. This will allow the resin to complete all its chemical reactions post curing and settle into its full strength, and that just is a better result. So once we're at that painting stage, we first want to set up a prime layer or a prime coat for these resins. I use a mix of the Citadel primers and the Vallejo primers to get this done. Vallejo, I use it through an airbrush, and Citadel is like a aerosol can, so it will just inject the primer material right onto your figures. For this particular figure, all the black parts, particularly the arms, were simply primed with my Citadel Chaos Black primer. Once this was done, I allowed it to rest for about 24 hours before hitting it with the Mr. Super Clear flat coat. It's a protective layer, and after the Mr. Super Clear, about 2 to 4 hours after it dries, and then I hit it with the Mr. Super Clear semi-gloss, and this is what gives it like a shimmery kind of effect, which kind of makes it look more like an action figure. So I think it's a really great combo to use. All of the blue parts on the suit were a custom color that my wife mixed. It's 2 parts of a Vallejo blue and 3 parts of another Vallejo blue. It was a dark and light blue, but it made this cool looking blue paint. Once we had that blue paint ready, we primed all the parts that were supposed to be blue or any other color with 2 coats of white primer. White takes a little bit more in terms of layers to get onto the figure and look white, so it did take 2 layers of white coat, get it ready, and then we used a mix of blue paints onto the figure, and the yellows and reds on the chest are simply just Vallejo yellow and red, and we put it onto the chest for the logo, and the skin colors and hair color is also from Vallejo. Now that we've painted everything, some of the paint was done some of the paints were hand painted, especially the black on the half of the body parts and half of the thighs and calves. They were all hand painted, and the reason we did it hand painted was because it was going to be like a very difficult task to mask parts off, but we just had to do 2 layers of black, and then they looked pretty awesome. We let everything dry after painting for about 24 hours. After they were left to rest about 24 hours, we sealed it with the flat, left it for about 4 to 6 hours, and then once the flat had sort of dried, we hit it with the semi-gloss, and then the figure is now ready to assemble after 24 hours post the sealing process. So to assemble the figure, we kick things off with the ankle joints. Here we have got the blue joint, which is the socket, and the black outer ball joint, which is the peg. And all we need to do is simply apply some pressure to attach these parts together. We do the same thing on the other ankles as well. And if you have a little bit of issue with the joint not connecting, you might want to give it a slight bit of heat using a hairdryer. About 10 to 20 seconds should be enough. It'll just make the resin slightly more pliable and you can push the parts in a little bit easier. Next, we will move on to the knees. We need to take the pegs similar to that of the ankles so that we push them into the holes. With the knees, there is a slight angle where there's a part that inclines in, which is the bottom part of the ankle, and the holes should basically face inside towards the figure. So make sure that you get that right. But all we need to do for the knees is get the pegs and push them in. A slight bit of heat may be required if the parts are too tight, but once they're in, they should stay in there without any issues. All right, and we do the same thing for the other knee as well. And if you look at the knee that's on the table now, the part that is at the bottom is basically sloping slightly inwards. This is to give the knee like a little bit of inwardness so that the legs look more natural when the figure's standing. And yeah, that's about it. Next, we move on to this complex piece, which is the drop-down hinge. It was a really complex bit of engineering. I had to spend like a few days, I think at least a couple weekends, just to figure that out. So very complex part, easy to put together though. All you need is to take the chassis of the drop-down hinge, take the peg, which we want to then peg from the behind, and then slide it slightly into the figure. Once it is in the figure or in the chassis slightly, we can then add one of the hinges, which you'll see in a bit. So once you add one of the hinges, you can slide it in a little bit more, and then you can add the other hinge and then fully slide the peg in. So to fit the drop down mechanism into the trunks, we simply heat up the trunks and push them in from the side slightly so that it creates like a slightly bigger cavity. You might want to tilt it slightly as well, and then it should fit right into the joint. On the screen at the moment, I did get it wrong. I had it faced like the reverse, so I had to take it out off screen and put it back in, but all it needed was just a slight bit of heating. Next, we can move on to the wrists, which is very similar to the ankles. All we do is add a little bit of pressure so that they peg in, and do it for both of the wrists, and the wrists are done. Next, we can move on to the elbows, and for the elbows, we want the smaller part to be at the bottom. So if you look at this here, the longer part is at the top because the longer part goes all the way through the biceps and connects straight to the shoulder. That gives you that mobility and also bicep rotation at the shoulder. So that's why we have set it up that way. Yeah, so if you look at what I'm doing now, there's one bit where the elbow, the bottom of the left elbow kind of had like a support artifact which caught on to the print, and when I tried to move it, it did break. Luckily, I had spare parts on hand, so I was able to quickly replace it, but you can see the break here. It wasn't fun, but I had a spare part, which meant that I could just easily replace it. And yeah, it's always good to have some spare parts, especially for the smaller parts. Moving on, we've got the shoulder butterfly mechanism. The butterfly is a two-part mechanism. First, we need to fit the butterfly socket into the butterfly cover. The butterfly cover is the cylindrical shape there. All we need to do is heat it up and then push it through. And yeah, it should work like that. We just do it on both parts. Next, we can move on to the shoulder hinge. We want to heat up the shoulder for about 40 to 50 seconds. And once that's done, push it slightly from the top and the bottom, and then the shoulder hinge should peg straight through. Once the shoulder hinge is in, we want to press it from the sides. And again, we want to repeat it for both sides of the shoulder. And once that's done, we can now connect the shoulder to the butterfly. Simply heat and pop, apply a slight bit of heat to the butterfly. Next up, we take the neck and basically peg it into the chest articulation thing. This was heated off screen and I just pushed it in, which was simple enough. The neck double ball peg leading up to the head is similar. Just apply a little bit of heat and it should peg straight through. Now we can move on to taking the chest articulation bit and attaching the shoulders to it. All we need to do is heat up like the part where the shoulder goes in, and then simply just push the shoulder hinge through. It just allows for like quite a lot of shoulder mobility in terms of going in and out, up and down, and also some butterfly. So it's a pretty cool joint designed based on Mafex's implementation, which was really difficult to do but pretty fun. Now we can take the elbows, and in the video I realized that I had the elbows on the wrong side, so I had to basically try the elbows out. To do this, I took the biceps. Because the biceps don't need to be very snug in terms of fit, I had to scrape some of the extra resin on the biceps so that the peg goes all the way through, and and then I tested out the bicep and the elbow for both the joints, and then whichever part fits better, that's the one that you should be going with. Yeah, because the bicep is not that important in terms of having that much flexibility or friction against the peg. We can scrape a little bit extra out of the biceps, so try out with the biceps first. For the knees and calves as well, you will need to scrape some of the plastic out or the resin out for the peg hole that's in the part. The reason we want to scrape this out is because there might be support artifacts, and also 3D printers might have some variances, and there might be some tolerance issues. So scraping it out is the best way to get the perfect fit. Once you do that, we can fit in the knees to the calf and the thighs, and then we can move on to fitting in the ankle articulation. The ankle might also need a slight bit of scraping. We just need to use a drill bit head for this. But once that's done, it should fit in pretty well and everything is assembled. Now with that out of the way, let's move on to plugging everything together. So here we're just still plugging in the other side of the ankle. We need to do it for both. There is a slight bit of rubbing at the knees on one of the ankles, if you saw that in the video. That basically happened because either there was too much paint applied to that part, or because there was a support piece that I didn't clean off properly. For the case in the video, I just didn't clean off the support piece properly. But yeah, if you clean it out really well, there should be some tolerance for all the joints, so that there should be minimal paint rub, but there's always something to consider. If you do it right, there should be no paint rub. Again, now at this point, I am putting the wrist together to the biceps and the forearms, sorry, the wrists and the fist and the forearms together. Let's do it on both sides. So here, what I'm showing you is basically there's a little bit, or there's a dab of glue at the trunks and the drop down hinge. This is the only part of the figure where you need to apply glue, but it's just so that it sticks together. Now we're pushing the abdomen into the chest articulation piece, a little bit of heat, and it should go right in. The ab articulation piece now has all pieces connected to it other than the chest and the back plates. So we'll do that next. All we need to do is grab our chest and back piece. The back has 3 pegs that it can peg into, and the back also has a few additional pegs that will peg into the chest, so that it gives you like a fully kind of enclosed enclosure. Apply a little bit of heat if you need to, but you shouldn't need a lot of heat here. A lot of pressure should do the job. But yeah, all you need to do is bring the 2 pieces together and then clamp them in. Once they are together, we can then peg the biceps into the shoulders, and they should be, the tolerances here should be pretty much mapped out. So all you need to do is stick it right in, and it should stay. Because the peg is long enough, it gives you that extra bit of friction as well, so that the parts will stay. The head after that is simply heat and pop as well. So all I do is take the heat, take the head, slightly heat it up, and then put it onto the neck. Moving on with the trunks, we want to heat up the socket of the thighs and then push it right in, and it should stick to the peg really well. We do it for both thighs, and the bottom half is complete. So now we have the bottom and the top half complete, and all we need to do is heat up the lower abdomen piece so that it goes straight into that peg that you see on screen now. And once everything is together, eradicator is done. In this video, I did not make a video for like the cape because I wasn't extremely happy with it. So I might do a follow-up video in the future, but for this point, I just wanted to complete this video so you all have access to just watching how things fit together. But I just threw together a cape and then put it on the figure. This is eradicator done, and the figure is now living on my shelf. Here's a picture of the figure on my shelf compared to all the other different Batman and Superman as well. So this figure is slightly taller than Batman and Superman, but I think he fits right in with the line. He's probably like millimeters taller. He doesn't look too tall and does look like part of the same universe. He can be scaled if you want to be a McFarlane size figure, so that's very easily done. If you want to do something like that, please reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to help. So there you have it, guys, the Eradicator action figure, fully 3D printed, painted and assembled. And yeah, hopefully this is something that you guys appreciate as well. I have a Patreon account now, so if you want to support my work, you can get onto my Patreon and help me there. I'm looking forward to seeing some of you there as well. You will be able to get access to 3D assets that I'll continue to work on, like 3D printable action figures and action figure accessories. And I want to also thank the one Patreon that I have at the moment, who's been super collaborative and super supportive of my work so far. Thank you so much, Chris, or Super Sojourn on Instagram, for supporting my work and being my Patreon and sticking it out past the first month. Thank you so much for your vote of confidence, and I'm really happy to have you on as a Patreon. Chris also does a bunch of custom work. Check out Chris's page on Instagram. He even managed to make a Bizarro action figure from the Eradicator files that I provided him, and I think that Bizarro looks awesome. I did work on a belt for Bizarro as well, so he might be printing that shortly and putting it up on his Instagram and Facebook pages, so make sure you follow him if you appreciate that. But there you have it, guys, the Eradicator action figure done and dusted. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.